DeJulius puts up a three. And goal!
Bearcat Blitz, time for another episode of the show right here on the Believe Network. I'm your host, Russ Heltman. He is Neil Meyer joining us from Sin City, Las Vegas, Nevada. Neil out there for Big 12 Media Day going down on Tuesday. We'll recap that later in the week. Before we get to all that action, though, we have a good show ready for everybody. Excited to get into that. But first, a message from Bet Online. It's your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. From baseball, golf, soccer, right to all the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads are available while the games are being played. When the contests are over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus, that 50% free bet credit that you get on your first deposit up to $250. Bet Online, the game starts here. Bearcat Blitz, fresh week and a fresh episode for everybody after we had a full week taken up by David DeJulius' awesome interview. Please go back and check that out on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. YouTube as well. You can watch David in full form right there on Talking Cats with Russ Heltman. Get to Neil in just a moment as we have some good stuff to bring you all, including Bearcats Media Day storylines. We'll get to that later in the show. What are the top Media Day storylines we're looking for as everybody gets together in Las Vegas, Nevada? We also look at Cincinnati losing out on Grant Bierman, top 2025 linebacker target in the city of Cincinnati. He is headed to Purdue, and another recruiting battle in the Midwest where Cincinnati loses to a similarly tiered program at the power conference level. We'll discuss the impact of that and just the class in general, losing ground nationally in the rankings. And we'll close the show with a look at the Smith League in action this past weekend. Rayvon Griffith with 35 points, Jizzle James with, I think, 47, near a 50 piece in the Smith League. Going to be a lot of fun to get to all that before we close the show. But first, got to get to some messages from our great sponsors here, including Bet Online and more. We love our sponsors. Stay tuned through that. We'll get to the top of the show with Neil from Las Vegas right after this on Bearcat Blitz. Neil, welcome you in now, my man. Neil Meyer of the frontofficenews.com and bearcatstalk.com. You can catch me at bearcatstalk.com as well. Real quick, the travels. How we feeling in the Sin City? You're tipping the temperature gauges at about 120 degrees almost every day in the afternoon, Neil. Hopefully you can come back unmelted for us and with some, I'm sure, plenty of great content in tow. How's the travels been, and how's Las Vegas living been these past couple of days?
Man, the travels were great getting out here. I didn't have any flight issues, so that's been a first for a while. For a couple of trips coming on the road, haven't had no travel issues, so that was great. But man, Las Vegas, you mentioned it, it's hot. Russ, I think when I took a stroll to go get some coffee this morning before filming this, it's about 9 a.m. out here, and it's already up over 100 degrees, so it's cooking. And yesterday it was our all-time record high actually at 119. So it's cooking.
Oh, it set the all-time flat temperature high in Vegas?
Yeah, 119. And when you're walking the strip, like you feel it. It definitely felt like it was 119 out there. But overall, I mean, it's a beautiful city, beautiful time, but really looking forward to getting some content. It's also pretty crazy to think Team USA is also staying at the same resort that I'm staying at.
You say Neil sent me a video of LeBron walking through the where were you guys at? The Bellagio? Is that where it is?
Yeah. So I was trying to go to the pool and I got stuck in a crowd, and the elevator I needed to get to go to the pool was on lockdown because Team USA was walking down. And then next thing you know, not even 2 minutes later, LeBron's walking by, and I was like, oh, okay then. And then all throughout the nights when you're coming and going, I've ran cross paths with Cooper Flagg Anthony Davis, KD at one point, Devin Booker. So, I mean, they're coming and going every time. But, man, Team USA is right down the road getting some extra work in ahead of their exhibition versus Team Canada, which will be right down the street at the T-Mobile Center on Wednesday night. So, really, really excited to see how that plays out. I'm really contemplating, Russ, getting tickets to see how that goes after media days on Wednesday, but they're a little expensive. But overall, man, it's Vegas. It's a great time. Weather's perfect outside the heat. No rain in the forecast anytime soon. So really looking forward to being out here and hopefully providing some of the best Bearcat content as we get out to Allegiant Stadium here over the next 2 days.
Should be a lot of fun. Ton of stars descending on Las Vegas this week. Glad you get to experience all that, Neil. So let's get to an experience Bearcats fans are not very happy about over the weekends. Grant Bierman, a guy that it felt like Cincinnati was right on the edge, right there at the finish line, but he chooses Purdue, Neil. You've obviously talked to Grant a few times for BearcatsTalk.com. This is a massive loss for the Bearcats. Not that they had him committed and lost him in general, but just another one of those premier options, those pure targets that Cincinnati should be able to land. Middle tier, 3-star hometown hero. And they're unable to get it done in a class, Neil, where there was not like there was 3 or 4 linebackers that he knew he was going to be competing with coming in. They only have one other linebacker in the fold, and that's Paul Nelson. And other than that, there was just not a lot of competition for Grant Bierman to come in here. And now with losing Grant Bierman here, you lose what was it? It was there was one of the defensive linemen they lost a couple like last week or 2 weeks ago.
Eric
that we talked about on the show. Yeah, Eric Gale, the other hometown hero linebacker who would have been joining Paul Nelson, but obviously left for Illinois. So now, Neil, you're left with Paul Nelson in the linebacker room. Not much else going on in the class of 2025 on that front as we speak right now. There's 15 commits overall, and I'll kind of let you address. We'll talk about the Bierman situation first, but Neil, this national recruiting class ranking looks a whole lot worse looking at it today than it did 2 weeks ago when we first had UC creeping into the ESPN standings. The way things are going now, they will not be in the ESPN top 50 in the next run around when they come out with that on ESPN. So just things obviously, unfortunately, slowing down on the recruiting front for Cincinnati, and all around the country, things are picking up. And you could see that in a guy like Grant Bierman picking Purdue over Cincinnati, a situation where, Neil, in my opinion, especially with a hometown guy, you should never lose a recruiting battle to Purdue for a player that you should be able to get in a guy like Grant Bierman.
Yeah, well, first off, Russ, that's well noting that Purdue is actually recruiting the Cincinnati area extremely hard, because not only did they land great Grant Bierman, but they also landed a guy who had some interest from UC and Drayden Pavey as well, who was on campus for official visits throughout the season. But Purdue's doing a great job. Coach Ryan Walters is really making an emphasis on the Cincinnati area.
He's the young guy too, isn't he? The head coach. He's just brand new. He did a great job with them last year when Braum went over to Louisville. So he has started very well in that first year, as opposed to Satterfield, who has the worst record in UC this century in his first year.
So, I mean, obviously, Russ, I got to talk to Grant Bierman throughout his whole recruiting process. This was a guy I've covered for the last year and a half. So I developed quite a great relationship with him and his family. But for Grant, he has a very strong future down there at Purdue. But everybody always notices you want to keep your local talent home. And you don't want to see them lose that recruiting battle to a school right down the road in West Lafayette, maybe 2-3 hours away in Purdue. But you look at who Grant had in his Final Four. It was Purdue, West Virginia, Michigan State, and Cincinnati. And, I mean, for him to fit down there at Purdue, he fits in perfectly for what Coach Ryan Walters is trying to do. But anytime you could add a priority target there in Grant Bierman to what would have been this recruiting class, I mean, he was a prime priority target for Scott Satterfield and this defensive staff here. I know when I got to talk to him, he really discussed it and broke down his relationship with outside linebackers coach and the two linebacker coaches, Nate Fuqua and Court Braswell, and he couldn't have spoken any more highly of what those two coaches have been able to do throughout his recruitment process. But Russ, you never want to see you lose a recruiting battle right here in Cincinnati to a school right down the road in Purdue. But it's something that this staff is probably going to be looking to address more here down the soon, because as you mentioned, Scott Satterfield has always praised keeping your local talent home within that 300-mile radius. But now that's two local talents that they have lost in the last recent weeks, with Eric Gale flipping to Illinois and now Bierman going to Purdue. It's going to be real interesting, and well, maybe even 3 with Drayden Pavey going to Purdue as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how they really start to get back here and recruit the Cincinnati area and try to find these ways to get these hometown heroes to come to Cincinnati again. But overall, as you mentioned, Russ, only one from Cincinnati now in the class, with Paul Nelson, after losing a guy like
Eric Gale.
Yep, down to Illinois. But it's going to be interesting to see how the staff really handles this recruiting process throughout the tri-state area. Everybody knows what kind of talent is here. I mean, Russ, look at a team like Lakota West, an example. There's prime targets up there at Lakota West. Cam Thomas is a young linebacker who's garnering national attention. Then you have Grant Bierman. That linebacker room up there at Lakota West with Tom Bolden, who that's Cincinnati has a lot of familiarity with. Lakota West is going to have some talent coming out year in and year out, I feel like. Princeton, former UC great and Hall of Famer Antoine Peak is up there doing a great job as well. So there's a lot of local talent here that might be able to keep home, but it just all depends on what happens in the near future.
And Neil, I think we have obviously preached patience on this show. We have preached it heavily, and I think we should continue to preach patience. Once we start getting the next year, though, and we've had these conversations offline a little bit in some other avenues, just 2026 is a massive class, man. Obviously, next year, I'm meaning the class of 2026, when that gets finalized in summer of 2025. It's a make or break class for Scott Satterfield, in my eyes, especially when you look at these numbers that are facing Cincinnati as this cycle winds down in 2025. Just, it's not good. They're 60th overall on 24/7 Sports right now. When we did this talk about Cincinnati losing Eric Gale a couple of weeks ago,
I believe they were sitting at 46, 42 range, right?
39th on 24/7 Sports 2 weeks ago. 34th on ESPN, 58th on Rivals, 44th on On3. ESPN, they're not going to be in the top 50 anymore with the loss of Gale, a guy who was their top-ranked commit on ESPN's board going into that ranking, and not adding anybody since then. Rivals, they're outside the top 65 now. On3, you're outside the top 50 now. It's not acceptable, Neil. It has to be better. The rankings have to be better. Now, the overall average player ranking on 24/7 Sports is better this year. It's solid. It's in the high 87 range, and that's decent. That'll work. But overall, man, it's just, you cannot expect to win high-level power conference football in this sport if you're recruiting in the 40s and 50s range. Last season, 2024 class, which was already wrapped up, was the on 24/7 Sports 60th ranked overall class. And where do we stand today in the 2025 class with 15 commits signed midway through July almost? I mean, there's not many more weeks of a window to get more guys signed. I'm sure they'll get up to around 20 guys overall committed. But all in all, 5 more recruits aren't going to likely change the majority of the foundation that this 15 recruits has built, and sits right now at 60th overall nationally, the same spot that Cincinnati was last year. Obviously, there's more commits in this class, and they were able to kind of fully recruit this one. But Neil, let's put the worry meter out there. On a scale of 1 to 10, going into this offseason, going into January, February, March, I was at about a 3 to 4 on the panic meter of the Scott Satterfield era. Still a ton of patience. Still, you got to give them 3 years. You got to give them that 3-year window to build the foundation up and really start to expect 8+ win seasons after that. But I think I'm up to a 5 or 6 now. There's just been no meaningful progress on the recruiting side of things with this class. And I talked about the average player rating being solid. Yes, that's true. But Neil, this recruiting staff that has done a solid job, I will say that, and they're having the whirlwind over the past 18 months of getting this together. they still haven't brought in a bona fide 4-star recruit in either of these classes. And there is no evidence that they're going to be signing a bona fide, no doubt across every major outlet, every major ranking statistic, 4-star recruit. There's no evidence that that has either happened or is going to happen for the 2025 class. So all of that rolled up, it has me raising my panic meter just a little bit. I'm on the patience train still. I'm not jumping off, but there have been no real signs for me to want to stay on this train for stops in year 3, stops in year 4, stops in year 5, and stops in year 6. What about you?
Yeah, for me, honestly, Russ, my panic meter hasn't jumped. It's still very low for me because this staff is doing a great job, in my opinion. I think they're doing a fantastic job.
What is the evidence, though, that they're doing a great job?
For me, obviously coming into year 1, what they had to take over, everybody should have kind of given that year a doubt. Shouldn't even hold it against them coming in. A
class that is now ranked the exact same as the second-year class.
Yeah, so year 1 for me, obviously coming into new school, that class was already signed. This is his first full recruiting class right here for Cincinnati. And you're looking at what it's led by. Mikhail Skinner, who is a 4-star, high 3-star on most sites, leads the class. I think he will be probably close to a 4-star on all platforms once he gets maybe come National Signing Day later in November or early signing day in November and then later on in December. But for me, I think it's right now the patience, people just have to have it. And once you have that patience.
Why do they have to have it, though?
Because obviously year 1, it's never going to be an easy transition. Obviously from you see a coaching change and then they come in late.
He hasn't had a winning record in a season this decade, Neil.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a different thing. Obviously coming from Louisville.
I'm trying to get you to tell the what is the evidence that this is going to get better? What is the evidence?
I think right now the evidence really is patience. I mean, you're looking at what this team returns right now. You have your whole offensive line returning. You went out and you made a big boost in the transfer portal at the tight end position, which was a significant piece of need. Then you do a complete overhaul. But the recruiting class, I see where people can get kind of maybe a little antsy there with the recruiting class.
This is where I can really see people getting upset with the Grant Bierman exit and not landing him and letting Eric Gale go to – now, the Eric Gale thing, he may not be an overall fit. Maybe he never ends up doing anything. But it's just – it's the certain situations that they keep losing out on in a school, in a city, in a location where you should never lose a player like Grant Bierman to Purdue. You're one of the top 20 winningest programs in college football over the last decade. Like, there is just no reason why he should pick Purdue over UC except for the staff, the coaching situation, and the idea that Ryan Walters is on his way up, and there is zero evidence that Scott Satterfield is on his way up. I hope to find that evidence this year. I hope to. I hope we start seeing that evidence on the field, and I will gladly point it out, as I have gladly been on the side of patience and just letting things coalesce. But at some point, there has to be momentum picked up. There has to be a bona fide nailing talent that is buying into this program that can be the guiding light for some other talents. There has to be 6 to 7 to 8 Ohio guys, 2 to 3 hometown heroes to make it seem like you are hitting the pavement and doing what you're doing, the actions that your words are saying. I get it, Neil. It's just I don't think you or I can give the people any evidence to why they should believe in this staff besides the idea that in college football you have to have patience. I think that's all we can give them, right, Neil? Because there's no evidence record-wise, and there's no evidence on the current player statuses of the talent they're bringing in the future that this thing is getting turned around. The only thing we can tell people is patience, right?
Yeah, I think patience is the biggest thing. Obviously, year 1 didn't go as planned in the Big 12 under Scott Satterfield going 3-9. But as you mentioned, patience is the biggest thing. You have to trust what AD John Cunningham is doing and why he made this hire in the first place. And for everybody who has been along this ride with John Cunningham, look at the hires he did. Wes Miller, Coach Bishel, Katrina Merriweather.
And I think those sports, Neil, are, to play a little devil's advocate against my kind of stance earlier, is football is harder to turn around. It is definitely harder to turn around.
Absolutely.
The classes were terrible that Satterfield was left with in terms of the talent this decade that Luke Fickell had recruited. So I will give them all that. And there you go. I mean, the patience is all you can have, but I totally understand why fans are very much higher on the basketball program right now, way higher on the basketball program, and getting downer and downer on the football program as the summer recruiting battles continue to get lost in these weeks. And hopefully some of these recruiting battles can be wins for the Bearcats, or else, like we said, there's patience is the only guiding light, because when you're ranked 60th compared to the same ranking last year of 60th, now that will go up. You would think they will add about 20 total guys all in all, but there is no reason to believe this is going to be a top 35 class as we sit here today and look at 2025 for Cincinnati. We'll see how it ends up around.
It's worth noting that these are hard commits or soft commits. They can't sign until November. So obviously a lot of things could change within this recruiting rankings and the classes as well. But until it's pen to paper in November and December, that's when the rankings really can kind of get altered a little bit. But overall, they probably will add about 4 or 5 more guys within this 2025 class that will probably raise that rankings. But it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out for sure.
Yeah, well, and the fortunate part for Cincinnati is a lot of their commits are earlier in the cycle, and the big dogs don't commit until later in the cycle. The 5 stars, the high 4 stars, the players that are majorly impacting the college football playoff race, they don't commit until this month, August, right before they start their high school football season. And that's why this ranking has flipped so dramatically in the past couple of weeks, because those big dogs are starting to commit, and none of them have been barking at UC. Take a quick break here on Bearcat Blitz, and we'll close out the show with some miscellaneous storylines leading into the rest of the week in UC Athletics. A few things to wrap up here as we close out this Bearcat Blitz. Jizzle James, Rayvon Griffith, big showing in the Smith League. We don't have to touch on this too long. There's no defense that gets played at the Smith League. I don't think it's a major story, but it's just another one of those good feeling stories around UC basketball. The most anticipated season this decade coming up, and even more anticipation kindling added to that fire with Jizzle James performing, I think, how you would expect, Neil, but I think even more impressive is that you get that 35 piece from Rayvon Griffith, a guy that nobody's expecting to score 35 in a game at all this season. But if he is an offensive weapon and can be immediately impactful on the offensive end, it's just another one of those versatile pieces that Wes Miller, Tim Buckley, and the crew get to work with.
Yeah, and it was actually great to see that, Russ, at the Smith League. Obviously, Jizzle James dropping 47 in his Smith League debut was a great sight to see, but more impressively, Rayvon dropping 35, because everybody knows he redshirted last season. But, Russ, if you watched any of the Smith League, I don't know if you got the chance to go out there, Rayvon Griffith's shot actually got tweaked very frequently from what it looked like last season during the redshirt to what it looks like now at the Smith League. So seeing that, and now getting the opportunity to work with Coach Buckley should be something very exciting to see for Bearcats fans. But obviously, now that the red shirt is up, it's really going to be interesting to see what Rayvon's role will be this season. Obviously, Russ, if you've seen the pictures as well, man, he's looked like he's lived in the Monster Factory all summer long. He's been one of those guys, along with the newcomers and the freshmen, who put their transformations out there. And I mean, Russ, I don't know if we talked about this on the last show, but Tyler Betsy coming in at almost 220 or like 215. That was an incredible sight to see as well. But
he was like 185 for the entirety of his senior year. I mean, that was what he was listed at 185, I think, right?
Yeah.
190, 185.
He got to campus and he was close to like 195 maybe. But he's put on some significant weight there with Coach Rayfeld in the Monster Factory, along with newcomers Connor Hickman, Arrington Page, Tyler McKinley as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what his role is, but you got to give a shout out to Coach Rayfeld and what he has been able to do so far this offseason in the Monster Factory. But Russ, like you said, it's going to be really interesting. Now, could Rayvon be that guy who steps in for a guy like John Newman from a season ago? Who knows? I mean, you heard it first we heard it first right here on this show last week with David DeJulius about what this team brings to the table. And the biggest thing he pointed out was the length of this team. You bring in a guy like Dylan Mitchell, Rayvon Griffiths, also 6'7". The length and the talent, it's going to be hard to really get downhill and attack on this Bearcats team this season, in my opinion. But hey, if you want the full clip of what David DeJulius said about this team, early impressions, go back and watch the interview, and you'll get the full answer on that as well. So Bearcats fans will be really excited to hear what he had to say as well.
Neil, what's your top media day storyline heading into the Bearcats interviews tomorrow? And we'll get out of here. Top
media storylines, I think everyone's going to be focused in on Dante Corleone and the health update. But for me personally, I would not be surprised if we don't get much of an update at all. Obviously,
I'm guessing it's going to be it's doing well, no comment from Scott Satterfield, something like that.
Because of the situation, it's only been 10 days since that came out. And blood clots is a very serious thing. And UC even said in a press release that they are still undergoing testing and there's still a lot of precautions that they have to do. So I'm not fully expecting a full update on Dante Corleone yet. But for me, Russ, I think the biggest storyline for me is this defensive back room. It's a complete overhaul from last season. You got a new defensive coordinator in with Tyson Veit. What does this defensive back room look like? Could Jordan Robinson from Kentucky be a guy who comes in and makes an immediate impact now that he is on campus and enrolled in Cincinnati after having some troubles in the transfer process from what we understood? But overall, you get him on campus. Could he be a guy that comes in and makes an immediate impact? I think you and I and everybody knows that Jordan Young is slotted to be cornerback 1 at that boundary position. From everything we saw in spring to what we saw last year, I think that's
should be a lot better on the outside this year too.
But what does this scheme look like? I mean, you have the Tyson Veit likes to run that 3-3-5. Does Kai Stokes, Mekhi Miller, or Derek Canteen kind of hold those other roles down, or will Jordan Robinson come in and be a guy that has a run? We also saw a good amount of run from a guy like Zaravion Johnson. True freshman, got some good run with the out there in spring ball. So what could be that defensive back room? We aren't sure. But that's the biggest storyline, Russ, because you looked at what the biggest issue was in 2023 was the deep play and the explosive plays. I think Cincinnati was one of the top teams, led the college football in explosive plays this season ago. So they go out and they make a huge addition out there in the transfer portal and make that an emphasis. Or Monty Arnold's another guy who had a fantastic spring. Could be a guy that comes in and makes another jump in there. But that's where my storyline is going to be, because you know what you're getting on the offensive line side of the ball. You know what you're getting. You get your offensive line returning. Joe Royer comes in at the tight end position, which is a big addition as well. And for Russ, you and I both know this as well, the quarterback position, I think it's a solidified. Does Brady Lichtenberg maybe push Brendan Sorsby a little bit? Possibly, but I think it's Brendan Sorsby's job to lose as of right now. So, I mean, I think they're pretty set there at the quarterback position as well. But that's where I'm focusing on, Russ, is right there at that defensive front. And what does this scheme look like? We're hearing high praise for a guy like Jake Galladay as well from the FCS level. They're really liking what they're seeing out of him throughout this spring ball. So it's going to be curious. Could he be a guy that comes in and makes an immediate impact at the linebacker position? Possibly. Nobody knows yet, but the defensive scheme is what's really going to be my biggest storyline and focus on this week.
Neil Meyer, I'm Russ Heltman. This has been Bearcat Blitz on the Believe Network. We're back to recap Media Day, Big 12 Media Day from Sin City later on this week. For Neil Meyer, I'm Russ Heltman. Enjoy the rest of your summer work week, everybody. This has been Bearcat Blitz on the Believe Network.
This is the second. 15 seconds left. Shot clock off. 4-point game. DeJulius puts up a three.